Hello everyone, and thank you very much for joining this room discussion. We are just going to start because we are very behind on the schedule. First of all, I want to introduce myself. I am Valeria Peláez Cardona. I am from Women Engaged for a Common Future, but I also represent the Women and Gender constituency and also part of the advisory board of the CTCN, that is the Climate Technology Center and Network, and happy to be here to moderate this discussion. So I think we can just enter in the matter. There are like two guiding questions, but of course happy to like discuss further this topic that is very broad, innovation and technology transfer. So maybe we can start with the first question. And please, maybe when you start, like when you have like an intervention, please give your name and maybe the party or organization that you're coming from. So the first question is like, how can innovation and technology transfer foster transformational and long-term approaches to adaptation that leave no one behind, including through inclusive innovation, local knowledge integration, and identification of scalable solutions? I know it's a little bit longer, but if you want, I can repeat it, the question. So, how can innovation and technology transfer foster transformational and long-term approaches to adaptation that leave no one behind, including through inclusive innovation, local knowledge integration, and identification of scalable solutions? So, the floor is yours. There is a hand, so online. So, yeah, please free to open your mic and speak. Thank you.
Hello, hi, good afternoon, and thank you for co-facilitating this. My name is Roya Al-Mahrizi, and I'll be speaking on behalf of the UAE. Uh, so, to answer your question, innovation and technology transfer, they must be catalysts for equitable and long-term mitigation and adaptation pathways. For the UAE, this principle is operationalized through Earth, which is a nationwide AI powered dashboard that provides real time climate adaptation data. This tool is helping to mainstream climate resilience planning across our health, food, and water sectors. The platform will measure performance against our future objectives around adaptation, such as reducing water demand by 21% and increasing the reuse of treated water by 95%. Our approach is like combines nature-based and engineered solutions through, for example, 100 million mangrove pledge. By this, we are enhancing coastal resilience and blue carbon with ensuring such innovations effectively, they would require predictable and accessible finance. Through the COP28 finance breakthroughs, the UAE is supporting vulnerable countries and mobilizing resources for technology, access, and resilience. In addition, the UAE is investing in climate tech ecosystem through platforms such as Masdar City Innovation Hub and National Startup Accelerator, enabling clean tech entrepreneurs to contribute to climate solutions. When we talk about food and water security, the Agua cluster, which was launched in 2024, it integrates innovation, research, and business models to advance climate resilience agriculture and water reuse. We invite parties to co-develop scalable technologies under the Just Transition Work Program that are inclusive, contextual, and community-driven. We also underscore the importance of engineered solutions, including carbon capture, utilizing and storage, and direct air capture as part of the innovation portfolio, which is needed to enable an orderly, science aligned energy transition. With such solution, this can ensure that euro remains just and does not lead to energy poverty. And as captured with the UAE consensus, the innovation must serve people and not just systems. The Just Transition platform connects national development priorities and resilience goals, ensuring obviously no one is left behind. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Anyone wants to follow up? Yep.
Thank you so much. I think that in this point of technology, something where we need to start is by asking what do we understand by innovation and by technology, because sometimes with different understandings, we are leaving aside different technologies that come from indigenous communities or other techniques that, for example, have been developed throughout history by women, Black communities, gender not conforming identities. And in the same line, when thinking about the questions on how it can foster a transformational change and in the framework of just transition, we also need to think about how the new or this transition is not going to repeat the same patterns of extractivism so far, of the extractive, let's say, processes that has been happening in fossil fuels. And what do I mean by that? I come from Colombia, and fossil fuels have come with the promise of the creation of jobs, yet this creation of jobs has not really happened. What happened is that there is the land has been taken, the resources has been taken, and the labor force that comes is also coming from abroad. So at the end of the day, there are not really skills, there are not capacity building programs that stayed on the countries where these technologies are implemented. So this is a question as well of how these technologies are really leaving something to the territories where they are happening, how these importation of the North is not really hindering or creating some more harm. So when we talk about technology transfer, it needs to come with strengthening the skills, knowledge from the local communities. And that is also like a big opportunity to think about how NAPs, but also NDCs, are going to facilitate and foster these different systems. Yeah, and I can stop here. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think there is and also UAE answer the second question. I think there is you mentioned also NAPs and NDCs, and I think that's a good starting point, or how we can start discussing about how is going to be the innovation and technology transfer in every context, and specifically how to ensure that it's not going to leave no one behind, with measures, indicators that can track how is going to be this implementation with an intersectional approach. Yeah, I think we can also link it with the second question, but of course, happy that you can answer all of them or each of one of those. So the second question is about how can innovation and technology transfer support adaptation measures, including ecosystem-based adaptation, nature-based solutions, food security, water security, and energy access. And perhaps here you can have also case studies or best practices that you have in your own countries that can be useful for this discussion.
Thank you. Yeah, Catherine from the EU. No, and I want to also, well, we agree very much with also that intervention from the Women and Gender constituency on where like the importance of engaging with these like local kind of technologies, social technical technologies in a way. And there has been some work. I'm not a specialist of that, by the way, like just transition, yeah, but much less the tech, etc. But there has been some work done on this by the technology, like the CTCN and the technology committee, and on engaging with local communities, including indigenous peoples and youth, to help ensure that adaptation technologies are culturally appropriate and effective, but also about incorporating traditional knowledge with scientific research, so that we develop more resilient and locally accepted solutions. So I think, yeah, there's some links to be made with what's already happening, the work happening in other work stream under the UNFCCC. And so, well, on the second question, there are like a lot of technologies that support the restoration and sustainable management of ecosystem that are already available and cost competitive. And in the same way, like from the EU, we have and some member states support already several CTCN technical assistance projects related to the ecosystem-based adaptation, nature-based solutions, and energy security, including the EU Commission funded project on aquaponics in Peru, agrivoltaic technologies in Senegal, Guinea, Togo, and the DR Congo. Yeah, so again, not a specialist of this, but giving some insights here that I can.
Hi all. I'm Abdurrahman Al-Mutairi. I'm representing Saudi Arabia. And to answer the two questions, I'll begin with the first one. So technology transfer should be equitable and demand-driven, ensuring that developing countries have access to necessary technologies, expertise, and financial resources to scale up adaptation measures. It is vital that these technologies are appropriate, adaptable, and accessible to local communities, including through training, capacity building programs. It is essential to emphasize that innovation and technology transfer should support a broad spectrum of adaptation strategies. This includes, but is not limited to, incremental, proactive adaptation, nature-based, and other approaches. And to truly leave no one behind, technological solutions must be easily accessible, context appropriate, and inclusive without limiting it to one adaptation approach. Specifically, long-term approaches must also take into account unintended economic consequences, particularly for developing countries, by ensuring no adverse impact arise from the transfer and deployment of technologies. Now for the second question about how can innovation and technology transfer support adaptation measures, including ecosystem-based adaptation, nature-based solutions, and food security. Technology, when combined with local knowledge, nationally tailored approaches, and capacity building, is a powerful enabler of effective, scalable, and context-sensitive climate adaptation. Technological advancements can help us understand climate risks more precisely and respond more quickly. Tools like climate modeling and early warning systems now allow us to forecast floods, droughts, and heat waves with greater accuracy, allowing communities valuable time to prepare. And with that, I would stop here. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Yeah, just making an intervention more on behalf of the local government and municipality constituency. So from the subnational perspective and on the point of, particularly on innovation, maybe a bit more than the technology transfer side, which is just broader considerations on what we mean by innovation, because from our perspective, we've seen some very good examples of where action has been piloted at the local level, at subnational level, which effectively is an innovation in itself. And that can be a lesson that can be learned in terms of how you can then uplift something that's piloted locally to a more national-based or broader approach. And I think that's sometimes overlooked when we think of innovation only and from the sort of technological perspectives. And then the second point I just wanted to make was around just echoing the comments that have been made already around the importance of local knowledge and different expertise in terms of how that feeds into solutions that sort of link the adaptation and just transition approach. You know, one of the things that we observe regularly from cities and regional governments is how they're able to understand the local context very strongly and also have maybe more direct interrelationships with local community groups or local different groups because of the way that the governance is set up, and how that can be a source of data and knowledge that can then feed into to action. But at the same time, there's a huge underinvestment in local data solutions. So there's regularly, for example, citing of underinvestment in early warning systems at the local level, which scale up of innovation, technology transfer and data could help solve, which then also feeds into how you ensure that there's greater resilience. So I think a specific thing we would say, in addition to just the role of the local governments and how that can be thought of innovation, is also the investment in data and technology to be able to capture the local needs at the local level. And that doesn't just need to be the subnational government level. It could also be, as mentioned by colleagues, support to particular local groups and constituencies that are able to track. So the classic example, of course, is informal settlements and informal workers in informal settlements where there's very limited data available. The best channel to get that data available is through existing communities and then also the local governments within that. And that's kind of a key part of this as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think I want to also, I'm just going to take the hat of facilitator and maybe intervene as CTC and AB. I think, yeah, the technology mechanism, as the European Union also was explaining, I think they have done an effort to support local solutions, because this process with the technology mechanism is country driven, so anything can be imposed to the country, but rather is something that comes from a consultation with the local government. And there is also very related with the work of program of 5 years, is related with the topics that we are discussing here, basically about water security, food security, energy access, and also linked with just transition and adaptation. That is what is bring us here. And the national innovation system. So here is also a profound need to strengthen the innovation systems of each party or each country, because it's the way that also we can address the local needs, as you were mentioned, and then address technologies that are going to be specific for the context and needs. And here also link it with marginalized groups, technologies for marginalized groups sometimes are different than the technologies that can be deployed in a general way, and that's something that also we need to keep in mind. Someone else wants to add something? Yeah, Costa Rica.
Hi, Pablo from Costa Rica. Well, as an example, of what innovation and technology can do for Costa Rica, at least, we work a lot with enhance the adaptation efforts in our country. As you know, we have a very green country, so we already got success with our payment for environmental services. It's been on for 30 years or so, and we pay landowners to conserve our forest land funded by a fuel tax of international support. But the innovation and the technology transfer is giving us the idea now to switch that payment for environmental services to a second and a third version, using the ocean and using the crop side, the crops on the country. So we're switching in order to to change that to to ensure our green conservation and to ensure more job opportunity.
Thank you very much, South Africa.
Thank you, colleagues. And I guess from my perspective is just to weigh in on this topic. Specifically, I think while we can appreciate experiences from countries and what at a local level countries' experiences or expectations are in terms of technology and innovation, but I think it's important to emphasize or not lose sight of the dimensions at which we are to have this conversation around technology transfer specifically. And technology transfer and development, in our view, is considered as one of the key enablers for a just transition, and not just in your domestic landscape, but also looking at how it can facilitate access at a global level. But also linked to that point is perhaps to locate this question around what role could technology be playing in facilitating just access to economic opportunities, or what role could technology be playing in facilitating fair access to adaptation and resilience for developing countries. So in looking at the justice lever and the equity levers linked to technology, but within a global context, and also not losing sight of the relevance of this conversation within the work program that we are developing. Thanks.
Anyone? No?
Hello. Well, in Dominican Republic, in our country, we have promoted technologies for water management, climate resilient agriculture, and early warning system, integrating traditional knowledge and community-based practice. So we really think that partnership with research institutions help identify and scale up appropriate technologies for both rural and urban areas. Thank you.
Perhaps something to add as well is how, because we have been speaking about throughout the day on people and communities, a workforce and other elements like these social elements that at the end of the day are going to be encountering or are going to be in contact with this technology transfer, but how truly are the different forms of work integrated in a way that is not only inclusion, but that is really part of the different stages of that technology transfer. And by that is through the design, the implementation, the monitoring, and not just at the end of the pipe as users solely that do not know then what to do with that. I think that also perhaps one element that I would like to bring as well is this notion of energy, food, and water security. Because security here, when we are talking about security, is yes, ensuring the access. But we are not talking about food sovereignty, we are not talking about water sovereignty, we are not talking about energy sovereignty. And when we talk about in these terms, we are understanding that is as well the ownership that the communities have to shape that process by themselves, to bring as well different elements that perhaps come in terms of the control practices, but also the cultural relevance of these technologies or of these processes that is not just to ensure the access of, but is something that is more embedded in the communities and therefore can create that ownership and therefore can create that sustainable process in time. Thanks.
Well, I think there is something very relevant to this discussion, and it's about like to not ensure only the access, and it's also like the use and like the implementation of the technologies at the local level. So like the discussion cannot be just like how we bring technology, climate technology to the developing countries, but also like how to ensure that they are going to use it and they are going to like make the best with it. Because sometimes what we have seen is like the technology is there, but maybe it's not suitable for the context or it's not suitable for the climate or the environment, so at the end it's not going to be used. And also about like workers, and because this is also about just transition, there is like the popular topic now is artificial intelligence and how we are going to use artificial intelligence for like just transition, but also to climate change. And there is like this question, like how we are going to support like the workers that are going to be displaced by artificial intelligence because we want to phase out fossil fuels. I don't know if anyone has a thought about that or something else. South Africa? Online? Anthony Dane.
Thank,
Yeah.
thank you very, thank you very much. Yes, I won't speak directly to that last point, but if I can go back to what my colleague was saying in terms of bringing it back to this work program, I think one of the things that is difficult in engaging with this topic and the questions is a lot of this is not necessarily new. I mean, the challenges are very real, but the efforts to promote innovation and tech transfer for adaptation is something that's been discussed and worked on. It's covered in other areas of the UNFCCC, and I think there's a question to ask of us in the room as to what is the role of this work program, and what is it that a specific focus on justice brings to this beyond the broader justice around needing to enable resilience, and the bigger sort of questions around climate justice. But I think there is a role, absolutely, and there's been a lot of good points made in terms of demonstrating when and how innovation and technology transfer is leaving no one behind and what that looks like. And I think that's very important to communicate. But I think it's also useful to try and focus in on what else we can bring to it. And I think looking back on some of the experience with the JETP, obviously not focused specifically on adaptation, but is that means of implementation support needs to be specific, and it needs to be additional and appropriate. So I think we need to try and understand where we are succeeding and some of the success examples that were mentioned in Costa Rica, for example, and to learn from those and say, how can we ramp up those sort of where we have promoted innovation and technology transfer for adaptation? How can we ramp it up so that we can deliver better just transition outcomes? Or where can we use just transition and a framing around just transition, or a strategic angle where we're delivering just transition outcomes as the angle that helps to get a particular project over the line that may be stuck. And I think these are opportunities where, yes, we can build on demonstrating and showing where something's consistent with the just transition, the justice lens, but how can we also lean into where justice is a lever that can move adaptation, where additional support, additional provision of means of implementation, specifically innovation and tech transfer, can unlock some of those adaptation investments. And there, I think the important thing is we need to be more specific. I think a lot of the time we talk in a very general, nebulous way. We need to look at what are those specific projects, and how do they need to be packaged into something that we can negotiate and agree on, and then start to really move forward with delivering the more sort of justice-focused outcomes of this effort. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anthony. And then online also, Tyler, apologize if I am pronouncing it wrong, Shafiq. And after this, then we need to start wrapping up. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Chair, and thanks a lot. You got the name right. It was close enough, but it was great it's good to see everyone in the room. I hope to see many of you in Bonn in a few weeks' time. Maybe I'll just touch on the point that South Africa just made, because I think it is important. I do think that maybe it gets into some of the discussions that we'll have on day 2, but I do think that there is a quite robust adaptation ecosystem that already exists under the UNFCCC, where a lot of these issues that we're talking about today are already ongoing, and they just don't share the same language, I guess, the same just transition language that we are utilizing here. So there's quite a bit of overlap when we talk about just transition and what that means in the adaptation space that's already ongoing. The same could be said for the technology space as well. If I can just point to one of the reports that was published by the Tech Executive Committee from 2023, which stated that the successful uptake of technologies require approaches that are gender responsive, inclusive, participatory, and they consider the needs, priorities, and knowledge and capacities of all technology stakeholders, including Indigenous peoples. They should also foster stakeholder engagement and buy-in regarding these processes and the technology. So I don't think I'm saying anything new that has already been said in this room already, but just to reemphasize that when we are talking about just transition, maybe the point to be made is to request the other spaces within the UNFCCC to really put forward or make the linkages to how it's being done in a just and equitable way, and maybe that's our job as contributors to this work program as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Tyler. Anyone has a final thought about this discussion? Yep.
Hello, Russian Federation, and we would like to offer that we need to use innovative solutions, including digital technologies and geographic information systems, because it enables for all of us to predict the efforts of climate change and develop adaptation measures to address them. And I would like to share some experience from our country. In Russia, we pay significant attention to integration of innovative technological solutions to adaptation planning processes. In particular, the AI solutions could be very effective in forecasting natural disasters. And AI-based models have been created to predict natural disasters such as fires, floods, storms, and permafrost thawing. And based on using these forecast models, the potential damage for our economy from climate risk has been estimated. And in addition, our companies are also involved in this process, and they use data analysis to build analytical models for adaptation risks. And for example, one of the technologies includes geotechnical surveys and drilling of observation wells with depths ranging from 10 to 20 meters. And they are all equipped with automated thermometric equipment. And in addition, we have created a flood modeling system to calculate economic damage from the impact of this kind of emergencies. So thank you for sharing our experience in that case.
Okay, thank you very much. So we are coming to the end. I will just like do like a quick summary. Yeah, like linkages with the UNFCCC, other mechanisms and other spaces that are having like similar discussions, especially like in the adaptation ecosystem, will be very engaging for this discussion further. Then we also need to like prioritize or like take into the consideration local solutions, but also like the local context, how we are going to approach like the innovations that are developed in the local level and scaling to the national level and then like the international and global level. Also like integrate business models like entrepreneurs, but also mobilizing resources, climate resilience data, so like the availability of data and research, also to know like what are the technologies that we need to prioritize for adaptation and just transition. Also strengthen skills and local knowledge, how this is also going to be included in the NAPs, that most of the countries here are working on it right now. Also engaging with communities, with marginalized groups, to understand what are like the needs that they have and how they can, like the technologies that we are going to develop and transfer are going to be context appropriated. And I think that's all because we are in our time. So thank you very much, and I hope that you have like other two discussions very engaging. Thank you very much.
discussion round. We will focus on capacity building and knowledge sharing, a topic that lies at the heart of effective climate action and inclusive implementation. I'm honored to serve as your facilitator for the next 45 minutes. My name is Miriam Garcia, and I'm from WRI Brazil. And we are joined by two colleagues from the UNFCCC Secretariat, one supporting with note-taking and another managing the speaker lists to help us to have a discussion that is both productive and well-documented. The session is designed to be interactive and inclusive, and we will hear interventions here from the floor and from those joining us online. So those online, please feel free also to raise your hand. As we proceed, I encourage concise and focused contributions so we can give the floor to everyone on the speaker list. To help guide our exchange, we have two questions to be answered in the session. So we can see the questions in the screen. The first question, it's quite a long one. So how can capacity building initiatives support countries in identifying key challenges and opportunities, in fostering context-specific, inclusive adaptation planning, implementation, and evaluation that effectively address local needs? And the second question, how can capacity building initiatives facilitate minimizing the risk of maladaptation? So please feel free to answer one or both questions during your interventions. And I will also announce when we are approaching the final 10 minutes of our session. We can begin by opening the speaker lists, and I invite everyone to register to the speaker list, so we can start with the first intervention. If you could please just present yourself when starting the intervention, so we can be also respectful for those joining us online. Thank you very much, and wish us all a good session. Anyone online? No? Thank you. You have the floor, European Union.
Yeah, so Catherine from the EU. Yeah, there are lots of comprehensive approaches to capacity building activities, education and skills exchanges, and training program to cultivate a skilled workforce that can really help and ensure a just transition. One of the possible capacity building effort is awareness raising and knowledge building about the expected impacts of a changing climate, and the question is then how you do this by like making sure that you include the targeted people in those efforts, and for sure the role of capacity building is important to if we make a link with previous discussion, it's important to enabling indigenous people as well as local communities to systematically identify and document relevant practices, assess vulnerabilities of this group, and co-develop scientifically robust solutions based on these indigenous peoples and local community knowledge. And then institute mechanisms that can scale up this solution. What is also a key aspect of capacity building is that, and we've said that in other rooms as well, is that these efforts are not at one point in time, but should be integral to over time along the whole adaptation cycle. And there are like a lot of activity that can support capacity building, targeted events, sharing information to web platform portals, reports, policy brief, as it's a lot of these actions and activities are already happening under the UNFCCC. And as a colleague online said, yeah, that's one of the role that the Just Transition program could, well, what we should look at is maybe what are the gaps and how Just Transition elements that we are discussing in these rooms can complement these work streams. And then we have talked also a lot in these rooms about, you know, like training, education, when we were talking about skills and the workforce. And that's also really like capacity building in a sense, and to in that sense, I would like to present an example from Germany. I'm not from Germany myself, but I'm from the EU, and it's one of our member states. And so where there has been some specific training for healthcare professionals and nurses that's on like sensitizing these people, the nurses and healthcare professional, on heat-related health problems for nursing staff and medical assistants, and so at the same time providing the like adequate healthcare measures during heat wave periods. And so there was a whole like system put in place with like material and like classrooms, etc., where this knowledge about the specific climate change impact was shared with those professionals who, that's it for us.
Thank you so much for sharing this important experience, as I think also it's important to bring health. Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, please, could you present yourself?
Yeah, thank you. I'm Steve. I'm speaking from Australia. I forgot to bring my flag. So I think, let me just switch this around. So capacity building, it's not one size fits all. And for adaptation to succeed, it's important to tailor capacity building to the local reality, strengths and needs. And our approach in Australia supports Just Transition by embedding this local leadership, knowledge and priorities at the centre. And this focus on local leadership ensures that adaptation both minimises risks and ensures lasting outcomes, because when communities lead, adaptation reflects the lived experience, the cultural context, and the place-based wisdom that some of us have touched on today. And so to support this as well, our skills development, we believe, should embed resilience. And so that's from training local disaster responders to supporting civil servants with climate risk tools, and we're preparing our institutions and individuals alike. And at the same time, it's important that community knowledge enhances planning success. So whether this is through Indigenous-led risk assessments or regional adaptation hubs, we believe these local voices strengthen national strategies. And we would in fact say there's no just transition without Indigenous people's knowledge. And so building on this as well, Australia, we're strengthening our institutions to enable inclusive adaptation delivery. And this is from our sub-national level legislation to federal programs like the National Climate Adaptation and Risk Program. And we're also going beyond. We're supporting Pacific institutions by embedding advisors and planning support, for example, through the Climate Finance Access Network. And just finally, Just Transition is smart adaptation, and this means building the right capacities in the right places at the right time. And so it's important for us to keep investing in people, systems and knowledge to deliver truly inclusive climate resilience.
Thank you so much, Australia. Yes, please, could you present yourself?
Karen Hedeman from Dominican Republic. As Australia mentioned, capacity building for Dominican Republic is a cornerstone for enabling inclusive, context-specific adaptation planning and implementation. In Dominican Republic, we have seen that the most successful initiatives are those rooted in local ownership, where communities are trained to identify risk, assess vulnerabilities, and design tailored solutions. Training efforts must also focus on minimizing bad adaptation by equipping decision makers with the knowledge and tools to evaluate unintended consequences. Sharing experience across countries and within regions enhance learning and foster more resilient, sustainable approaches. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Do we have anyone online? No hands online. Oh, Saudi Arabia, you have the floor.
Abdurrahman Al-Muteri. So if I were to answer the first question, I would say that capacity building is essential for helping developing countries identify the real challenges and opportunities they face in adapting to climate change. To be effective in a 1.5 degrees Celsius to a 2 degrees Celsius world, this support must go beyond general advice. It needs to strengthen technical skills, improve access to reliable data, and build strong institutions that can turn climate risks into practical, tailored solutions. It is also important that these efforts are rooted in national and local realities, reflecting each country's needs, knowledge, and socioeconomic conditions. Ultimately, capacity building should empower countries to plan, implement, and adjust adaptation actions that protect communities today while building resilience for the future. I give you back the floor with the facility.
Thank you so much. Malawi.
Thank you, Zunera from the LDC group. I just want to share a really great example of an LDC initiative called Life AR that has really made a huge difference in building capacity of LDCs to not only respond to climate change and build adaptive capacity, but also to really take ownership of sort of adaptation planning within the LDCs. So it's one of the tools that is fulfilling the LDC 2050 vision. There were 2 pilot phases, and now Life AR will be onboarding more LDCs, and the idea is really to have a long-term partnership with LDC countries and, foster locally led, locally owned adaptation. And there's a lot of pride within the LDC group of this initiative. And, LDCs have special needs and circumstances. So one of the key sort of principles of Life AR's work is also to work at the pace of LDCs, which lack capacity and perhaps may not always fit the regulatory requirements of international funders or donors. So this is really a way for LDCs to build long-term programmatic adaptation practices instead of just working from project to project. Thank you.
Thank you, Malawi. I see South Africa.
Thank you, Chair. And I think from my end, just to weigh in on the capacity building component, I think based on our experience, what we've learned is what's at the center is country ownership. And in country ownership and in your design and implementation of your policies, it's important that your efforts are country-led. And although capacity building will take on different dimensions, or you would focus on different elements, but at the center of it is for it to be driven by the needs and priorities of what the country needs. And in terms of, I think it's important to also lean in on within this conversation, what are some of the capacity gaps that we would need to address holistically. And these range from project preparation, from structuring and development skills, from capacity in accessing project financing, in implementation skills and the rollout of just transition projects, and as well as the monitoring and evaluation of such projects. So it ranges from different categories, and it's important to be able to map where the gaps are and to have the necessary interventions depending on the gap. And just to also give reflections on some of the experiences from my country with our transition plan, is that in developing our framework and our just transition plan, there's also an investment plan and an implementation plan. And within that implementation plan, there's very targeted intervention that speaks to the infrastructure investment that's required, and in there lies a capacity need or a capacity gap. There is also building in the institutional capacity to enable the country to roll out such a plan across different sectors of society. But there's also the skills component that's linked to capacity building. And that also would require a very targeted, intentional intervention, not only within the country, but also within the partnership globally. Thanks.
Thank you, South Africa. Yes, please, you have the floor.
Thank you. Yes, just Jasmine speaking on behalf of the local government and municipality constituency. I just wanted to echo, there were some really wonderful interventions by colleagues who have already made comments, particularly about the importance of local knowledge and also about empowering local government structures. But I wanted to, so I just said to echo those, but I just wanted to make two sort of share a couple of examples that have come from the local level that can maybe help answer the question about how, capacity building initiatives can support countries. And the first one, we have been working with a lot of city level governments to look at how you actually deliver equity-led programming in climate action, which is very much delivering on a just transition, and the issues that you look at can range of everything from energy poverty to just energy transition, but also to adaptation and resilience, and how that is fair and ensures that it leaves no one behind, and you think about the different implications for different populations. And as part of that, we have been supporting doing a number of capacity building initiatives with different city level governments, and I think that's maybe just an interesting thing to touch on, which is looking at what are the barriers to actually effectively doing the planning and delivery that really centres the equity and resilience as part of what you deliver. And some of the things that came up were some of the things that have come up many times before in other discussions, but things like, who is the silos that exist between different government departments, and how do you empower different departments or individuals to engage with different departments to enable that sort of inclusive and joint planning. And one of the feedback we've had regularly from city governments is that the people who are maybe leading on the climate planning aren't necessarily the ones that are doing the implementation. And so how can you start that at the beginning and actually build capacity building for that actual purpose? So if you're going to be equitable in what you plan and deliver, how do you break those silos from the beginning? And it's been quite an interesting process as well, also looking at how you you do the different levels of needs assessments for different populations and how that sits across multiple different functions, and there's a need for capacity building to understand how you do that. So we had an example from one of our cities where it's not actually an adaptation example, but it is a resilience example, where one of our cities, Barcelona, had a huge problem with heat risk faced by elderly populations that was manifesting through energy poverty, but actually the data that sat with the data and the day-to-day interactions that to reach those populations actually was with the social services department, but the planning for these policies was being done by the climate department, and actually dedicated capacity building was needed in terms of how you overcome that and do that level of planning. So I just wanted to share that one example because I think it kind of touches on how we integrate adaptation with the kind of wider issue of just transition and the capacity building examples that have worked. And then the second example I just wanted to share was it actually links the previous conversation we also had about data, but the city of Rio in Brazil spent dedicated a lot of resources and capacity to setting up an operations center that looks at integrating risks in risks from heat, risks from flooding, risks from different crisis, climate emergency elements, and particularly looking at how you integrate local knowledge, including some of the examples that were mentioned, into that feedback loop that's fed in that tracks this, but also through that process actually create a number of jobs on resilience and a number of new jobs and skills and new jobs and skills for the workforce. So it also kind of links to the process that the point that if you kind of can think about dedicated activities that help build overall resilience, this can also help in terms of a jobs and skills issue, which is obviously key to a just transition. So small scale examples, but with the idea that these can maybe be useful inputs into thinking about capacity building. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have one online, then I invite you to the floor. I'm hoping I'm telling your name correctly. Tyler Shafrika from ECCC. Is that right? You have the floor, and welcome to Panama.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, that is right, and I apologize if I did not introduce myself last time. Just want to say that I'm Tyler Shafrick from the Government of Canada. ECCC stands for Environment and Climate Change Canada. So I think there have been many great points in this session, and I don't think that I'll go over them all, but just to highlight that again, local knowledge and Indigenous knowledge is quite important for capacity building. Just to highlight again, my colleague from Malawi on behalf of the LDCs on the example of Life AR. I think this is a great project that I appreciate that it's being highlighted. Going back to the previous speaker, maybe to just break down a little bit more of the silos that we have in the UNFCCC, I would want to highlight some of the work that's being done under the Adaptation Committee on some aspects of just transition that, again, going back to my previous intervention in the last session, I think there might be some talking past each other on what constitutes a just transition, but many of the toolbox, the toolkits, the lessons learned, the knowledge building and capacity building that's being done under the Adaptation Committee includes some of those elements. I'll just name a couple of them. They have a report on incorporating Indigenous people's knowledge. They also have one on gender responsiveness to ensure the sustainability of climate resilience efforts. And I'm also told that there is a forthcoming report on stakeholder engagement and institutional arrangement. So I think those are important to highlight in this session. And yeah, I'll end it there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and it was a pleasure to have someone online joining. Thank you so much. I have Veranda over. Yeah, can you present yourself, please?
Hi, Mini Degawan, Indigenous Kankanaey from the Philippines, but working here in Panama with the FSC Indigenous Peoples Foundation. Everything that was said about capacity building are all very important, but there's one thing that I just wanted to raise. Often Indigenous peoples are looked at as targets of capacity building. And when we talk about toolkits, all are directed about how to work, how to do stakeholder engagement, and so on and so forth. And I would also like to flip the coin. Sometimes project developers, governments need capacity building to work with Indigenous peoples. It's very easy to say incorporating traditional knowledge, languages, systems in capacity building projects or programs, but do we really know how to do that? It's not that easy, and there is no one one size fits all. What can work in Costa Rica, sorry, I'm looking at the, what can work in Costa Rica may not work in the Philippines because the context of indigenous peoples are very different. So maybe that's one capacity building need that has to be addressed is how do we work with indigenous peoples? How do we actually do free prior informed consent properly so that we do not just check the box and say we've done it, but why are there still issues coming from the ground? So I just wanted to raise that, as you know, often we talk of capacity building and knowledge sharing and always look at indigenous peoples as the target of capacity building and knowledge sharing. And maybe it's time to also look at the other way around. So thank you.
Thank you for your intervention. Any other intervention? Yes, please.
Thank you very much. I'm Agnes Svinblad. On behalf of Bingo, I represent the United States Council of International Business. I just wanted to come in briefly and say that, yes, hearing a lot of really great thoughts on the need for policy coherence. So I really just want to, again, emphasize that and say that that's something that, as the private sector, we view as exceptionally critical to have policy coherence, which then will lead to policy certainty and policy predictability, which is what the private sector depends upon in order to conduct themselves responsibly and operate. And when we look at policy coherence in this context, again, I do want to reference back to what we heard from Canada, for example, just really looking at all the excellent work that is already being carried out and making sure that we're not duplicating work. So we heard references to the adaptation committee, certainly also worth looking at the very impressive work being carried out by the KCI under the UNFCCC. Lots of really detailed technical work happening there that could really help inform these discussions. And just looking at capacity building initiatives and how to minimize risks of maladaptation, I think they're, again, what we're hearing a lot in this discussion, and which I certainly align with, is the need for better collaboration on a national level. And I think there's an opportunity here to explore how that could be incentivized. So again, what we're looking to do, right, is break down silos and have a whole of government approach to these questions. And I think there's an opportunity to perhaps gather very concrete best practice examples and to have countries have easy access to that. I don't know what that would look like, a database or something of that sort, but just to really facilitate that cross-learning between countries and then enable that national level implementation, which again also feeds into what we talked about throughout the entire day today, right? That there is no silver bullet solution for just transition. It really has to be nationally adapted, nationally implemented. So I think there's real space for capacity building in that sense of learning from each other, looking at best practices, and making that cross-learning a more seamless experience. But yeah, just some thoughts, and I'll stop there, but thank you.
Thank you so much. Anyone else? Yes, please.
Okay, Russian Federation. Yes, I would like to continue my thoughts that I told in the previous sessions. So in our view, capacity building activities beyond upskilling and reskilling of workforce should focus on sharing information about climate change in the regions, definitely informing the business communities, citizens about measures, how to adapt to climate change, the possibility of implementing climate change projects. And we would like to share our best practice in one of our regions. For example, in the Khanty-Mansiysk region, this region has climate change events, strategic, thematic sessions, roundtables that are held via region. And what else? Educational institutions that are located in the territory of the regions, they conduct training and educational programs in the field of climate change, including adaptation to climate change. And what else? They held events for students of schools, secondary, higher, vocational schools. So we need to engage more and more people in this process. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Oh, yes, please go ahead.
Thank you. Just a short thought and following as well what we were discussing at the end of the last plenary, and is that we need a sort of enabler that can facilitate this to happen. No, in terms of where this knowledge sharing can happen, all these best practices can happen. We have heard from Malawi and from others, like different initiatives that have been there. So. And I echo as well what Burkina Faso was saying at the end, that we also kind of need to be thinking about mechanisms. We need to start thinking about how are we going to move from these dialogues, like what are we going to do afterwards? Otherwise, just not to keep on going in cycles of dialogues, but then it start having such a platform, such a vehicle, such an enabler for this knowledge sharing that can enhance exactly that capacity building. So just a thought on that. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Can you present just the...
Yes, apologies. Gina from the Women and Gender constituency.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think we still have another 10 minutes. Anyone else? Yes, you have the floor, Saudi Arabia.
Hi, thank you. I wasn't sure if we were answering question 2 or not, so I was waiting, but I'll just jump in and talk about that. So for how capacity building initiatives facilitate minimizing the risk of maladaptation, we view that capacity building efforts are essential for increasing awareness of adaptation actions that are both effective and tailored to local context. Heightened awareness enables more informed decision-making, whether for immediate needs or long-term solutions. Rather than focusing on what could go wrong, the emphasis should be on doing adaptation well-grounded in local realities, supported by national priorities and informed by local knowledge. By improving technical expertise and long-term planning capabilities, capacity building helps ensure that adaptation measures fit for the purpose, responsive to evolving risks, and aligned with broader national development priorities. It is essential to ensure that a broad spectrum of adaptation approaches remains available to all countries, particularly developing countries. Adaptation must reflect national priorities, varying vulnerabilities, and diverse social, economic, and ecological systems. Imposing a prescriptive or narrowly defined criteria risks, such as maladaptation, undermining the very flexibility that is vital for effective adaptation planning and implementation. Many developing countries are already facing multifaceted climate risks while also contending with limited financial, technical, and capacities. As such, adaptation strategies must be context-specific and responsive to evolving realities. This includes enabling countries to pursue both short-term and long-term responses informed by their own knowledge system, planning cycles, and development goals. And I guess it goes back to one of my earlier delegate colleagues was mentioning that there's no one-size-fits-all, should be determined by specific needs of a specific nation and even specific regions in that nation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, we have less than 10 minutes, 8 minutes now. any other intervention? Do we have any online intervention? No. So I think we can end the session, and I would like to thank you so much for being so participative. We had a smaller room, and you were very participative, and I was also happy to have interventions from online participants. Thank you so much. For those in Panama, we're going to have a coffee break right now, and then we're going to have our last breakout group in the same room for you guys. Thank you so much. We as facilitators, we're going to move, and for those online, I can also hope that you can stretch your legs and have some coffee and water, whatever you are. Thank you so much. Good afternoon.
So, hi everyone. Thank you so much for being here, for driving the whole afternoon, and you are awesome. So, let me introduce myself first. My name is Ana Carolina Martinez. I'm a regional officer for climate and resilience at the World Food Program, and today I will be not necessarily facilitating, but mostly listening to your insights and trying to capture highlights, main ideas, concerns, challenges, and lessons learned regarding a very complex topic that I have been managing, let's say, on climate finance and international cooperation. So if you can see on your screens, we have two guiding questions. We do not want to go one by one. Rather, we would like to hear from you your thoughts and some ideas. I'm just going to point out what will be main focus of these questions, and I will leave the floor for you guys to intervene. So the first question, what are the lessons learned for financing just transition pathways that include adaptation and climate resilience measures, including innovative finance, direct access, and financing for social protection systems? What we're looking for on this question, what would the focus for us will be on those lessons, challenges, concerns, on how we can link just transition pathways that will be focused on adaptation and climate resilience with the social protection systems that are already in place in different countries. So we want to know from your experience what you have seen about these linkages. In the second one, how can just transition pathways ensure that they support the identification of a value case for adaptation and facilitate the crowding in of the private sector in a way that complements public finance and ensures equitable access to vulnerable communities? What we want to be talking about or discussing is on these other actors, how we're bringing in different actors to the table to actually facilitate what we already know is a very limited public finance space to deliver the just transitions that we need. So with that said, I will leave the floor for you guys. Please feel free comfortable to mention what are your concerns, experience, insight. If we want to talk about something that we have seen that have worked, please do. If we want to say something that hasn't worked, please do it too, because that is what we need to know just to gather insights and create a better program. So with that said, I leave the floor for you. Okay, so this is a smaller group, so I think we can feel comfortable about coming in. I just wanted to highlight that we have around 30 minutes for the discussion. I'm not rushing anyone, but please do feel comfortable just to talk about it. Something that might make sense to you, some experience that you have, or some concerns. Yes, Saudi Arabia, thank you so much for breaking the ice. The floor is yours.
Hi all. You already know me in the group, but for the facilitators, I'm Abdurrahman Al-Muteri. So to answer the question, I will start by saying, we believe that developed countries must provide finance for developing countries in line with their obligations under Article 9 of the Paris Agreement. Financing just transition pathways that include adaptation and climate resilience measures must first align with NDCs and climate action plans and NAPs. Just transitions financing cannot be dictated by global policies that prejudice nationally determined policies. So finance for developing countries must at all costs avoid conditions. In this regard, finance must also be provided through highly concessional means and grants. Countries should identify their own national adaptation plans. Financing adaptation must remain bottom-up, considering the national determination of each country. Scrutiny and prejudice over adaptation priorities and pathways must be avoided to ensure that all countries receive the support they need. Innovative finance can allow developed countries to scale up their support to developing countries in line with their national needs and priorities. Innovative approaches to de-risk investments and increase leveraging rates will be key to allow developed countries to scale up support. While we support innovative approaches to unlock the scale and access of finance for developing countries, we cannot accept proposals that shift the finance burden to developing countries and consumers in the global south. Furthermore, we cannot accept any approach that would lead to high socioeconomic costs for developing countries, thus hampering their just transitioning efforts. We wish to re-emphasize that all finance provided by developed countries through their obligations under Article 9, Paragraph 1 of the Paris Agreement must be concessional to avoid exacerbating debt issues in developing countries. According to the Standing Committee on Finance's 6th biennial assessment, 26 developing countries were identified as at high risk of debt distress, 10 of which were already debt distressed. Financing just transition pathways that include adaptation and climate resilience must consider national sustainable development priorities and poverty eradication efforts. Social protection system must be determined by each country with consideration of their unique circumstances. Top-down intrusion from developed countries for setting social protection system must be avoided to ensure that each country gets an equal opportunity to determine their own pathways. With regard to private sector and other financial actors, recognize that the need to send strong signals to attract investments and funding to developing countries in line with their needs and approaches. For too long, international actors based in the global north have led the same expectations on developing countries as developed countries, ignoring the principles of equity and common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities. For transitions across thematic areas to be just, such actors must not only scale up finance to developing countries, but they must do so in line with the needs and priorities of developing countries. And I guess for the other question, how can just transition pathways ensure that they support the identification of a value case? We emphasize that a value case for adaptation must not shift responsibility away from developed countries' obligation. Adaptation is significantly underfunded. We acknowledge that adaptation ventures are neither profitable for investors nor for countries receiving investments through negative flows and repayments. While acknowledging this challenge, we wish to not undermine the obligations placed on developed countries for financing climate action in developing countries. After all, historical contributions to climate change have reduced the challenges developing countries face. Therefore, we call on developed countries to provide finance for developing countries through grants and highly concessional means as per their obligations. Relying on private sector for climate finance, particularly for adaptation, will produce an unbalanced outcome for developing countries. We reaffirm the significant challenges of debt in developing countries, and crowding in private sector could lead to unanticipated challenges, exacerbating issues with debt. We will not accept any call to dilute the responsibility placed on developed countries through crowding in the private sector in this regard. We acknowledge existing barriers in developing countries for accessing finance. We recognize that risk perception is a key barrier preventing developing countries from accessing finance, particularly investments from the private sector. To combat these barriers, challenges such as risk perception must first be addressed to increase private sector engagement in developing countries and breed a healthy investment environment. According to the IPCC, effective regulatory and policy packages are tailored to national circumstances. There are no two countries that share the same circumstances exactly, and therefore policies across countries differ. Aiming to tackle unique challenges and realize unique opportunities, we must avoid a one-size-fits-all approach to policy advocacy and implementation, and provide the policy space and country ownership needed to allow developing countries to address their policy needs in a manner that attracts funding to their priorities. I give you back that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Do we have another intervention? Sorry, I cannot see, but yes, you can.
Shall I? Thank
yes.
you. Hello, I'm Marta Stencil from C40 Cities, representing local governments and municipal authorities constituency. As myself and my colleague Jasmine have highlighted in this dialogue, cities and other subnational governments are just transition implementers, and as many national government delegates also highlighted, they are very key players in terms of implementing just transition national strategies and making sure that these actions are localized with tangible benefits for workers and communities. Despite that, what we are seeing, and that was highlighted in the research that at C40 we conducted with the United Nations University in Bonn, is that out of just transition finance and social protection finance sources, only 3 are with direct access to cities, showing clearly there's a gap in financing actions at the local level that can be replicated and scaled up. There are already some examples, however, of acknowledging the role that cities and other subnationals play in just transition implementation, also in adaptation and resilience. And that there's one example in South Africa, where under the Just Energy Transition Partnership Program, there was a window for municipal financing open with direct access to cities. So definitely there are innovative approaches that can be scaled up. Finally, I also wanted to mention an approach from one of our city members in Seattle that really brings that social dialogue component as well to financing for just transition. And in Seattle, the mayor and the city council have established a Green New Deal Oversight Board that consists of local authorities, civil society, workforce development experts, and union leaders. And that group guides how financing is being spent to ensure that workforce development is suitable for instance, marginalized group in the city. So that's, I think, a very interesting and innovative model of how social dialogue is integrated with financing at a local level that definitely can be scaled up across the board. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Do we have any other insights, concerns? Yes.
Yeah, I can perhaps make some points. I would like to start as well by problematizing how the current international financial architecture is not really serving any purpose that when we think about transitioning, when we think about as well the long history of structural adjustments that have actually made some harm in the different territories. And for example, I'm bringing the example of Colombia, when Colombia announced that they were going to move away from fossil fuels, they were immediately penalized in different ways, like financially, they also went very down in ranks and so on and so forth. So how can we be coherent in this system, in a system that is for those countries that are making the bold step to move away of what has been causing this climate emergency, and at the same time they are being penalized. So I think that this is something that we cannot just ignore. In addition to that, and that's a point that I had made as well in one of the other conversations, was that we need to be talking about debt and how the current debt system is not allowing or is also restricting the fiscal space of so many countries, particularly from the global south, to start investing and developing their own industrial policies that are going to serve that just transition pathway. So when talking about finance, when talking about international cooperation, we need to put in the table the question, the topic or the aspect of debt cancellation, and as mentioned as well before, debt cancellation just not for the sake of being cancelled per se, let's say it only, but how when we understand that by the debt, countries as well are being pushed to have austerity measures that are not allowing the financial flow for the guarantees in social protections, then we are once again going into the cycle that we are not serving the transition that we want. All the discussions that we are having of, yes, we need social protections, we need health systems, we need disaster risk management and so on, but where is the money going to come from if countries are still being drained, let's say, being with this illegitimate debt that actually comes from a very colonial past. So these are part of the discussions that we should be thinking. And I forgot to present myself, but I come from the Women and Gender constituency, and also one of the main collective demands that we have as well in terms of finances, what are we funding currently? We are not funding a transition, we are funding a system of murder in which militarism gets more and more finance than actually climate ambition. The 2024, there was an increase of 9.4% of the military spending. Again, it was around 2.7 trillion that was given to military spending. So what are we actually funding? What are actually countries prioritizing? And that's as well a way in which we need to be critical or think critically about it and see where the money can be actually put. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I pass the floor now to South Africa.
Thank you, Chairs. And I think on this topic, I would want to also agree and echo the sentiments raised by colleagues who have leaned in on the structural barriers that are associated with inhibiting countries' abilities to transition. And in there, I think it's important to lean into elements that speak to addressing the high cost of capital, addressing the skills and capacity deficits, and addressing the debt and fiscal constraints that exist and that inhibit countries to transition in a just and equitable manner. So sending a clear signal to the financial systems that are currently not designed to deal appropriately with transition pathways, that would be the point of departure. But also to raise some of practical or critical elements that sort of fall within the bracket of issues that are challenges and barriers, and that we could collectively seek towards achieving or addressing. And it's in dealing with or having an approach that deals with urgently scaling up concessional financing in a very targeted and intentional way. But also, I mean, the numbers are glaring, where in terms of, yes, there are solutions that would speak to blended financing, but there are gaps even in these sort of solutions. So the need to deploy new financial instruments, and to be more creative in terms of the new financial instruments that could be employed, but that are non-debt instruments. I think that one is critical. But also to raise issues or concerns around currency risks that exist for developing countries, which also creates a significant barrier or challenge when it comes to transitioning. And linked to that, I think it's important to flag that within the adaptation sector, there is a glaring gap in terms of financing, but we would want to see, or the need to start to speak of early stage investment within the adaptation sectors in order to bridge this gap between innovation and implementation. So essentially, from where we are coming from, it's to not only address some of the gaps and concerns within the means of implementation, framing around finance specifically, but how do we frame this conversation around facilitating international cooperation and facilitating international partnerships in order to enable countries to move into new industries, in order to enable countries to move up value chains and ensure just access to economic opportunities, but also to ensure that countries are able to maintain competitiveness as they transition. So not to be sort of one-dimensional in how we approach the conversation, but look at a system-wide approach in what we need in terms of financing and means of implementation, but also have a very nuanced understanding on what countries need and where the gaps are. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I think we have around 10 minutes left, so please you're welcome to jump in. Okay, we have European Union and then we have Mingo.
Yes. Thank you. So building on what has been said on where investment go, indeed. So just according to IPCC AR6 synthesis report, we know that there is a sufficient global capital to close the global investment gaps for transition towards net zero emissions and climate resilient development, but there are barriers to redirect capital to climate action, including adaptation action. And so it also notes that public and private finance flows for fossil fuels are still greater than those for climate adaptation and mitigation. And for this reason, the Paris alignment of all financial flows, as per Article 2.1c of the Paris Agreement, requires greening the entire economy, recognizing that different sectors and different countries will have different starting points and different just transition potential. And if we go back to like the core of the discussions that we are having in this dialogue under the Just Transition Work Program, so I think parentheses, but we need to refocus a bit our discussion to that, I believe. But from a just transition perspective, it's really essential to define accurately how different economic activities and projects meet not only climate and environmental objectives, but so also the social objectives that we have been talking a lot about in this dialogue and the previous one, so that it help channel finance towards those activities that that meet all these criteria and that credibly demonstrate the business case for adaptation investment, help investors report how their investments finance a just transition, and that can be one of the contributions of the Just Transition Work Program. And to answer the first question on lessons learned, there has been a recent report, independent evaluation of the pilot program for climate resilience of the Climate Investments Funds, which is one of the oldest multilateral programs dedicated to adaptation and resilience, and it offers some lessons learned basically, and it shows that its programmatic approach was key to successes, that it provided predictability and scale that allow governments and multilateral development banks to pursue strategic and transformational climate resilience programs that are relevant to countries' contexts. Another lesson learned was the need to attract more responsible private finance investments through provided flexible financing for private sector and demonstrating the business case for, as I said, adaptation investments, reducing the risk for local institutions to provide credit to SMEs for resilience building measures and building a pipeline of bankable projects for future programs to draw on. And we also learned from this report that programs must improve design and exit planning to ensure the sustainability of project outcomes and long-term climate resilience. And finally, this program made it clear that over-reliance on environment ministry did not allow mainstreaming and that national planning and or finance
ministries would be better positioned to effect changes within the sectoral ministries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The floor is yours, Ingo.
Thank you very much. I'm Agnes from Bingo, representing the United States Council for International Business. So I will primarily address the second question. So when we talk about supporting the value case, we essentially talk about building the business case, the investment case for further adaptation and resilience action. And of course, from a private sector perspective, this is critical to best enable overall implementation action. So when we look at climate finance and adaptation finance, we need to, of course, start from a core, robust public finance commitment, and then look at that outer circle, which includes private finance flows. And just to go through some of those high-level items and high-level concepts that the private sector needs to better be able to contribute to adaptation finance efforts, especially in emerging markets. So first, of course, a pipeline of scalable adaptation projects. We need to look more to and implement more innovative finance solutions, and this certainly includes what we've heard mentioned already, such as blended financing, but also newer solutions such as green bonds. But perhaps the most critical point really is access to high integrity climate risk data. The lack of sufficient data deters investment because that creates uncertainty about risks and returns. So this certainly also speaks to the need for capacity building efforts, also the need for tech transfer initiatives. There's also a strong need to build out, again, local high quality data sources for climate risk mapping and planning. And then, of course, national policies that actively incentivizes investment and which then will also move finance flows in the right direction to contribute to adaptation, but overall contribute to Paris Agreement implementation. So then just as a final point, I want to say that, of course, the private sector certainly recognizes the operational risks that climate change brings. And this is especially true when it comes to failing to invest in adaptation efforts. So again, access to high integrity data allows the private sector to truly consider a risk management approach, which then also actually makes economic sense. So by making informed decisions that are proven to safeguard against climate risk and which will facilitate adaptation efforts, that will then also ultimately build climate resilience and climate resilient businesses. And that will also then contribute to avoiding the worst impacts of climate stresses. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we might have time for one more. So Malawi, last but not least, thank you.
Thank you. Malawi on behalf of the LDCs. I think the first question, it might be a bit too early for us to say. We're not really sure how much finance is coming in that's earmarked for just transition pathways. And I think it's really important to also, we know that the adaptation financing gap is quite stark, and we want to make sure that there's not a lot of double counting, even though a lot of these principles of just transition pathways are interconnected with adaptation and similar measures. For LDCs, our NDCs are like the implementation tool also for principles of just transition. We did a study which found that to implement not the new round of NDCs, but sort of the existing NDCs, we would need $1 trillion, which is itself pretty close to the NCQG goal. So it's really important to be careful when we're thinking about talking about finance for just transition pathways, because for us actually gaining that finance and showing communities that just transition is an opportunity for growth and development is really important to create political buy-in and also popular support. So in fact, here we should be discussing how to gather finance that is specifically earmarked for perhaps just transition specific projects and yeah, make sure that we're not double counting. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure if we have any other intervention. I guess we have one more minute, so maybe we can wrap up. It has been a long, oh, we have Australia, sorry. Yes, please jump in.
Yeah, thank you very much. And this is a strong topic, and there are a lot of, it's a very important topic as well. And I just want to touch on a couple of experiences in Australia in relation to a couple of these questions. And I think Australia's approach to adaptation supports just transition in that it's science-based, it's locally led, and it's nationally backed. And when it comes to finance and just transition, these pathways must be focused on long-term development. And in a couple of ways, Australia is doing this. We talk about climate finance for adaptation in the Pacific, and we talk about some of the major investments like 350 million for climate resilient infrastructure and 100 million for the Pacific Resilience Facility. And this support helps Pacific nations lead locally driven adaptation efforts, build resilience and protect livelihoods. And investment in projects like the Tuvalu Coastal Adaptation Project demonstrates how adaptation finance can protect lives while also respecting cultural values and supporting economic resilience. And I think that's how these can tie together. And innovative finance should also prioritise some of these social protection systems, reach vulnerable communities, and deliver both social and environmental returns. So direct access to funds through mechanisms like the Pacific Resilience Facility, as I just mentioned, and embedded national climate finance advisors. This strengthens country ownership and also builds capacity, tying into some of the discussions in the last session. So, and then on building a strong value case for adaptation, just transition pathways should show tangible benefits, and such as jobs, resilience, community development that matter locally. And while public finance, of course, remains crucial, it should be used to crowd in private sector investment as well without displacing it. I think for time I might just leave it there, but thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I think on the chat we also have some input, so thank you all for those who are online too. So we are on time, but I just want to thank you all for your inputs, and I think it has been a very good way to end these sessions, this thematic breakout rooms. You have provided, I guess, like as a wrap up for us we have seen what are some good examples in the first group, what are the main challenges and concerns. We saw that on group 2. And now with you, I guess we have been able to ground some options and some of the values that I think we need to move forward for this to actually make sense in a context that we're living, where yes, there is limited fiscal space, where yes, we have differentiated situations, and yes, we need to address, because this is not something that can be another topic, but adaptation is required, it is a necessity, and the transitions are part of that. So thank you very much for your insights. We will try to put some of them here. We have been gathering inputs the whole afternoon, so that will inform also the program. And we see you now, just to wrap up the day, in meeting room 2. Yes, we will end the day there. So thank you very much.